When you first hear that a ketogenic diet is low in carbs and sugar, you might think, well, I'll never get to have cookies again. We're happy to report that this is not at all true. While it does take some rewiring of your go-to recipes, with the right substitutions, you can make and enjoy baked goods on keto. The first thing to know is that the traditional flour and sweeteners in your cupboard have got to go. While it can be hard to visualize how you're supposed to bake without all-purpose flour or white sugar, stick with us and we'll give you all the keto secrets for how to rebuild your baking pantry. Let's start with flour. All-purpose flour, often bleached and stripped of most of its nutritional value, has become the standard in most conventional baked goods. But just 1 cup of all-purpose flour contains a whopping 100 grams of carbs. It's a true no-go for anyone following a keto diet. You may see gluten-free flour alternatives like corn and rice flour in the health food store, but those are also too high carb to use. Here are the low-carb flours we use instead. Almond flour, made from almonds that are blanched and then pulverized into a fine powder, is one of our favorite keto-friendly flours. 1/4 cup of almond flour contains 12 grams of fat, 5 grams of protein, and only 2 grams of net carbs. Its high fat content and lack of gluten means that you may need additional eggs or baking powder to provide more structure in your baked goods. Almond flour has a great, lightly sweet flavor and helps to create a tender crumb in baked goods. It can be expensive in grocery stores, but you can find some good deals online. For the best texture in your baked goods, purchase finely ground almond flour. Coarser ground almond meal is less expensive, and the rougher texture is less noticeable in baked goods like muffins. Always store almond flour and meal in the fridge to prevent it from spoiling. One thing to keep in mind when using keto-friendly flours is that you can't substitute it for all-purpose flour using a 1-for-1 ratio. Each type of keto flour will require some adjustments and additions depending on the recipe to get the most enjoyable results. With almond flour, that might mean using a little less oil because of the flour's high fat content and an extra half or whole egg. Additional rising agents like baking soda and baking powder can be helpful too. Always bake with almond flour at 25 degrees Fahrenheit lower than the recipe calls for, and let the dish bake for a bit longer. Also, because almond flour tends to brown faster than all-purpose flour, we suggest covering your baking pans with aluminum foil. And just remember, eating too many almonds can flood your body with inflammatory fats and phytates, so try not to overdo it with the almond flour. Next, we'll look at coconut flour, which is made from dehydrated coconut meat that the fat has been extracted from. 1/4 cup of coconut flour contains 60 calories, 2.5 grams of fat, 6 grams of protein, 19 grams of carbohydrates, 12 grams of fiber, and 7 grams of net carbs. It has a mild, neutral, sometimes slightly nutty flavor that lends itself well to lots of baked goods. If the brand you buy has a light coconut flavor, remember that other ingredients like chocolate and vanilla will easily mask that taste. Just like with almond flour, you can't simply substitute equal parts coconut flour to all-purpose. The general rule of thumb is to use 1/4 to 1/3 cup of coconut flour for every 1 cup of regular all-purpose flour. We know that doesn't seem like enough flour for a recipe, but coconut flour soaks up liquids like a sponge. So for every 1 cup of coconut flour, use 6 eggs and 1 cup of liquid. The flour will absorb all of that moisture and create enough bulk for the recipe. Always be sure to let the batter stand for a few minutes to allow this process to happen and the batter to thicken. This will result in sturdier, less crumbly baked goods. Unlike almond flour, you don't need to adjust the baking temperature when using coconut flour. Keep it stored in an airtight bag or container in a dark, dry spot in your pantry. One thing we love to do is to combine almond and coconut flours. We found that the best ratio is 3:1 almond flour to coconut flour. Together, they more closely resemble all-purpose flour and eliminate the need for all those extra eggs. However, you'll still need to keep the liquid ingredients at the same ratio suggested for coconut flour. Flax meal, which is just ground up flax seeds, is another important addition to your keto-friendly baking toolkit. When flax meal is mixed with water, it absorbs the liquid and creates a gelatinous texture, which can be used as a replacement for eggs. Flax eggs can't be used in a recipe in which many eggs are called for. It works best to just replace 1 or 2 eggs. To replace 1 egg, mix 1 tablespoon of ground flax meal with 3 tablespoons of water and allow it to swell. We recommend making your own flax meal at home by buying whole golden flax seeds and grinding them up in a food processor right before you use them. To prevent spoilage, store flax meal and flaxseed in an airtight bag or container in the fridge before and after opening. Walnuts and other nuts like hazelnuts, pecans, macadamia nuts, and pistachios can also be finely ground to create flours. They're low in carbs but present challenges for baking. Their flavors can be powerful and not appropriate for some recipes, and because there aren't many recipes out there featuring these sorts of nut flours, learning to use them can take a lot of trial and error on your part. Simply buy raw nuts and use a food processor or blender to grind them into the finest texture you can. For those allergic to nuts or coconuts, there are some other flours to consider. Sunflower seed and pumpkin seed flour are relatively low in carbs and can replace almond flour with a 1-to-1 ratio. Organic soy flour has a similar texture and moisture absorption to coconut flour, though it is very high in protein, so keep that in mind when tracking your macros. For the most successful outcomes in keto baking, there are a few other things you'll need to have on hand. Because low-carb flours don't chemically work the same way as all-purpose flours, there are a few helpful ingredients that can make your baked goods more light and fluffy. Psyllium husk powder is a big favorite of low-carb bakers. It's a thickener that helps the recipes bind together and gives baked goods, especially low-carb bread, a great crumb-like texture. Protein powder, whether whey, casein, or egg white, can also be a useful tool in baking. It has a binding effect that's similar to the gluten in wheat flour, and just a small amount added to recipes can help to achieve that familiar consistency you're looking for in baked goods. Xanthan gum is a natural thickening agent that is both flavorless and carb-free. It's helpful in different kinds of keto cooking, like making soups or homemade ice cream, and in keto baking, it helps to provide a wonderful cakiness to baked goods. Replacing traditional white and brown sugar is also essential in keto baking. For more info on keto-friendly sweeteners, check out our video titled Best and Worst Sweeteners on a Keto Diet. A few more general keto baking tips to keep in mind are: resist the urge to thin out low-carb batters too much, as this often results in a soggy mess. Low-carb batter should be a bit thicker. Allow your keto-friendly baked goods to completely cool before digging in. We know this is tough when there's a delicious treat right in front of you, but allowing your treats to cool for a few hours will result in better texture. Low-carb crackers and pie crusts will be crispier, and muffins and cakes will develop a better texture. It's worth the wait. Finally, as the keto diet becomes more mainstream, you might see commercial low-carb baking mixes on market shelves. While some of these are okay in a pinch, we suggest sticking to keto-friendly recipes and using the simplest ingredients possible. You might also come across pre-made products like cookies or brownies that claim to be keto-friendly. While this sounds exciting, many of these items have been found to contain more net carbs and have a bigger impact on insulin secretion than the packaging indicates. Remember to read the label and diligently track those carbs. Also, before buying pre-made keto-friendly baked goods, do some research on the company to make sure it's trustworthy. After all, one cookie isn't worth getting kicked out of ketosis. Ultimately, doing your own baking at home gives you the greatest amount of control over what you're putting in your body. With a little planning and a well-stocked pantry, you'll have all the tools you need to replicate your favorite baked goods at home. Be sure to explore the recipe section on RuledMe for plenty of creative, delicious ideas for keto-friendly baked goods and treats.